I was hiking a ridge trail in the White Mountains of New Hampshire when I noticed the cairns were leading me off the trail. Not gradually, deliberately. Someone had built a series of rock cairns that started on the official path and curved gently toward a cliff edge that dropped 400 feet into a ravine. The spacing was perfect, every 30 feet, exactly the distance between the real trail markers. The rocks were stacked the same way, 3 stones, largest on the bottom, smallest on top. If you were following cairns in fog or low visibility, you would walk right off that ridge without hesitation, because every marker told you, this is the way, and this is the way led to a 400-foot vertical drop onto granite. I was 15 feet from the edge when I realized the real trail was 40 feet to my left. I had been following fake cairns for nearly a quarter mile. Somebody had built a path to a cliff and made it look official, and the fog that morning was thick enough that if I had been moving any faster or paying any less attention, I would be at the bottom of that ravine right now, dead, on rocks, because I trusted a pile of stones that someone had stacked with the specific intention of killing a stranger. I was 32, an experienced hiker. This was September of 2024. I had been hiking the Whites for over a decade. I knew the trails, I knew the weather, I knew that the Presidential Range produces its own weather system and that conditions above treeline can go from clear to zero visibility in under 10 minutes. I knew that cairns are how you navigate above treeline when you can't see the next blaze. I knew all of this, and I still almost walked off a cliff because the person who built those fake cairns knew it too. They knew how hikers think. They knew we follow cairns without questioning them. They knew we trust the rocks the way we trust a painted blaze on a tree, and they used that trust to build a 1,300-foot runway that ended in thin air. Subscribe right now if you haven't. What the search and rescue team told me about those cairns is something that kept me awake for weeks. Drop a like too. 1 second. I had started the hike at 5 a.m. from the Appalachia Trailhead. The plan was to summit Madison and Adams. A long day, but doable if the weather cooperated. By 7, I was above treeline. The fog rolled in around 7:30, not uncommon. Visibility dropped to maybe 50 feet. I slowed down. I started following cairns. The trail above treeline on the northern Presidentials is marked by cairns every 30 to 40 feet. You walk to one, you look for the next, you walk to that one, repeat. In fog, it's the only way to navigate. Your world shrinks to a 50-foot bubble, and the only things you trust are the rocks and your compass. I was following them steadily when I noticed something felt wrong, not visually, physically. The terrain under my feet was changing. The trail above treeline is mostly flat rock and tundra, but I was walking on a slight downward slope toward the east. The trail doesn't go east on that section, it goes north. I stopped. I pulled out my compass. I was heading east-northeast, directly toward the edge of Madison Gulf, a massive cirque with near vertical walls. I turned around and looked back. The last cairn I had passed was 30 feet behind me. I could barely see it in the fog. I looked forward. Another cairn was visible about 30 feet ahead, right at the limit of visibility. I walked toward it, 3 stones, properly stacked. I looked past it. The ground beyond was rock, then nothing, a drop. I got on my hands and knees and crawled forward. The edge was right there, maybe 12 feet past the last cairn. I looked over, fog, but I could feel the void. The air was different at the edge, colder, moving upward from the ravine below. I backed away on my hands and knees. My whole body was shaking. I retraced my steps cairn by cairn, back to where the fake line diverged from the real trail. It took me about 10 minutes to find the split. The real trail went left, the fake cairns went right. The junction was nearly invisible. Both lines looked equally legitimate, same stone size, same stacking pattern, same spacing. The only difference was direction. Left kept you alive, right killed you. I knocked down every fake cairn I could find, 8 of them. I kicked the stones apart and scattered them. Then I continued my hike on the real trail. When I got back to the trailhead that afternoon, I reported it to the AMC ranger station. The ranger listened. He didn't seem surprised. He wrote everything down. Then he told me something that made the ground feel less solid under my feet. He said this was the third report of false cans on the northern Presidentials in 2 years. The first was on the Gulf Side Trail near Thunderstorm Junction. A hiker had followed false cans toward the edge of the Great Gulf headwall in heavy fog. He turned back when his GPS showed him heading toward a cliff. The second was on the Airline Trail near the Adams Summit Cone. False cans redirected a couple toward a steep gully. They realized the error when they heard water below them. Running water means gully. Gully means off-trail. They backtracked. Both incidents were in fog. Both involved cans that were indistinguishable from real ones. Both led toward drops. The ranger said they had investigated all 3 sites. The cans were built with local stone. No fingerprints, no DNA, no boot prints around the bases. Whoever was building them was doing it on exposed rock where prints don't hold. They were building them in conditions where nobody else would be on the mountain. Early morning, bad weather, fog. They were building them when they knew nobody would see them work. And they were building them with knowledge of the trails that only comes from years of experience in those mountains. This wasn't a prank by a teenager. This wasn't random vandalism. This was someone who understood can navigation and ridge geography and weather patterns and human psychology well enough to construct a trap that looked exactly like salvation, a trap that exploited the one thing every hiker above treeline relies on when they can't see where they're going: trust. Trust in the rocks. Trust that someone before you built them to keep you safe. Trust that a can is an act of kindness, not an act of murder. The ranger told me one more thing before I left. He said they hadn't found anyone responsible, but he said the spacing and construction of the cans across all 3 incidents was consistent. Same hand, same method, same intent. One person building paths to cliffs on 3 different trails over 2 years, patient, methodical, returning to the mountains in bad weather to check if the cans are still standing, rebuilding them if they've fallen, maintaining them the way a hunter maintains a trap, the way a predator maintains a territory. And every single path was built in a location where a fall would be fatal and a body might not be found for days or weeks. He said if any of those hikers had fallen, the death would have been ruled an accident. Hiker lost in fog, walked off a cliff. Tragic but not unusual in the White Mountains, not murder, just the mountains being the mountains, which is exactly what the person building those cans was counting on. The mountains take the blame. The cans disappear in the next storm, and nobody ever knows that the path they followed to their death was built for them by someone who was probably watching from a ridge nearby, waiting to see if the fog was thick enough and if the hiker was trusting enough, and if this time the trap would finally work.
Something in the woods called my name, my actual name, not a shout, not a yell, a whisper. Close, maybe 10 feet to my right, in dense forest where I could see nothing but trees and shadow. My name, spoken in a voice I didn't recognize, spoken clearly enough that I could hear the 2 syllables separate and distinct, like a person standing just out of sight behind a tree, leaning toward me and saying my name, the way you'd say it to wake someone up, gently, carefully, like they didn't want to startle me, like they knew me. I was alone on a trail in the Ozarks 4 miles from the trailhead, and something that wasn't human and wasn't animal whispered my name from behind a tree and waited for me to respond. I didn't respond. That might be the only reason I'm here to tell this story. I was 25. This was early November of 2024. I was doing a solo day hike on the Ozark Highlands Trail in Arkansas, a section I had done maybe 5 times before. Nothing remote by serious hiking standards, but isolated enough that you can go all day without seeing another person. The trail follows ridgelines through hardwood forest. In November, the leaves are mostly down. The forest opens up. You can see further between the trees. The ground is covered in a thick layer of brown and gold leaves that crunch under every step. It's beautiful and it's loud. Every footstep announces your presence. Everything in the forest knows where you are. I had been hiking since 8 a.m. It was around 1 p.m. I was eating a granola bar on a log near a creek crossing when I heard it. My name, spoken from the trees to my right, not shouted, whispered, "Close." If this is making your heart beat faster, leave a comment. Have you ever heard something in the woods that knew who you were? I need to explain why this terrified me beyond the obvious. I was alone. Nobody knew I was on this specific trail. I had told my roommate I was going hiking, but I didn't tell her which trail. I hadn't passed another hiker all day. There was no one within earshot who could have known my name. And the voice didn't sound like a person calling for someone. It sounded intimate, private, like someone whispering across a pillow, like someone who knew me well enough to say my name softly and expect me to recognize them. Except I didn't recognize the voice. It wasn't male or female. It was something in between, or something that was neither. A sound shaped like my name, produced by something that understood what a name is but not what a voice is supposed to sound like. I sat on the log holding my granola bar, and I did not move. I did not turn my head. I did not look toward the sound. Something in me knew, with absolute certainty, that looking was what it wanted, that responding was the invitation, that saying "who's there" or "hello" or anything at all would be giving it permission. Permission for what I don't know. But the feeling was as clear and as loud as any thought I've ever had. Do not answer. Do not look. Do not acknowledge. I sat there for maybe 3 minutes. The forest was quiet. No birds, no wind, just the creek behind me. Then my name again. Same voice, same whisper, same distance, but this time from my left. It had moved, without a sound. No footsteps on the crunchy leaves, no branch snaps, no displacement of air. It had relocated from my right to my left in complete silence across a forest floor covered in dry leaves that crack if a squirrel walks on them. Whatever said my name didn't touch the ground when it moved. I stood up. Slowly. I picked up my pack. I put it on. I started walking back the way I came. I didn't run. Running felt wrong. Running felt like prey behavior, like admitting to whatever was watching me that I understood what was happening. I walked at a steady pace, eyes forward. I did not look left. I did not look right. I counted my steps, one after another, crunching through the leaves, each footstep loud enough to hear from 100 feet away. And yet whatever had moved from my right to my left had done it in complete silence. I thought about that as I walked. The forest floor was covered in dry oak and hickory leaves, ankle deep in places. If a deer walks through them, you can hear it from a quarter mile. If a squirrel hops through them, you can hear it from 50 feet. But this thing had moved at least 20 feet across that same floor without displacing a single leaf, without producing a single sound. It didn't walk. It doesn't walk. Whatever it does when it moves is not walking. I walked for about 20 minutes before I heard it one last time. Behind me now, further away, maybe 40 feet, my name. The same whisper, but this time it sounded different, not inviting, not curious, disappointed, like whatever had been trying to get my attention had realized I wasn't going to give it. And the disappointment in that whisper was worse than the whisper itself, because disappointment implies expectation. And expectation implies planning. Whatever was in those woods had planned to meet me, had known my name before I arrived, had positioned itself near the creek where I always stop because it knew I would stop there, because I've hiked this trail 5 times and every time I eat lunch at the same creek crossing. It knew my route, it knew my habits, it knew my name, and it was disappointed that I didn't play along, that I didn't turn my head, that I didn't say hello, that I didn't walk toward the voice the way every instinct in my social brain was screaming at me to do. Because when someone says your name, you respond. That's how humans work. We hear our name and we look. It's automatic, it's hardwired, and something in those woods knows that about us. It knows the trigger, and it uses our own wiring against us. I made it back to my car. I drove home. I told my roommate. She thought I was messing with her. I showed her my hands. They were still shaking. 3 hours later, still shaking. I haven't hiked that trail since. I haven't hiked alone since. And I haven't told anyone my name on a trail since. Not in a register, not on a permit, not in a conversation with a passing hiker, because something in those woods already knows it. And I don't want to find out what else it knows. And I don't want to find out what happens to the people who answer.
There is a cabin on a trail in the Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont that is not on any map and is not maintained by any agency and has been there for at least 40 years based on the condition of the wood. I know it exists because I've been inside it. I wish I hadn't. I was 39. September of 2023. I was doing a solo 3-day hike on the Long Trail, Vermont's oldest long-distance trail. I had been section hiking it for years. I knew the shelters, I knew the water sources, I knew the terrain. On the second day, I got caught in a thunderstorm around 4 p.m., the kind that turns the trail into a river in minutes. I needed shelter. The next official shelter was 3 miles away. I wasn't going to make it. I ducked off the trail looking for a rock overhang or a dense stand of conifers. Instead, I found a cabin, about 200 feet off the trail, set back in a stand of old spruce. I almost missed it because the wood was so weathered. It was the same gray-green as the trees. One room, maybe 12 by 12, a door, no windows, a rusted metal roof. I pushed the door open and went inside. The interior was dry, clean, not abandoned clean, maintained clean. The floor was swept. The walls were bare wood. In the center of the room, there was a table, a simple wooden table with one chair. On the table, there was a book, a leather-bound journal, closed, and next to the journal, there was a pencil, sharpened, ready, like someone had set the table for writing. I looked around. No bed, no stove, no shelving, no supplies, just a table and a chair and a journal and a pencil in a cabin in the woods that nobody knew about. I sat down. The storm was hammering the roof. I was soaked and cold, and this was the only dry place within miles. I opened the journal. The pages were filled, dozens of entries, different handwriting, different pens, different pencils. The journal was a logbook. Hikers who had found the cabin before me had written in it. The first entry was dated 2003. The most recent was from 6 weeks before my visit. Over 20 years of entries. Most were short. Found this cabin in a storm. Dry and grateful. Or weird little cabin off the Long Trail. Glad it's here. Normal stuff. Trail register entries. The kind of thing hikers write in shelter logs. But about a third of the entries were different, longer, more detailed, and deeply unsettling. One entry from 2011 said I stayed here for the night. Woke up at 3 a.m. The door was open. I closed it. Went back to sleep. Woke up again at 4. The door was open again. I didn't close it the second time. I just lay there watching it until dawn. Nothing came in, but something wanted to. Another entry from 2016 said the chair was in a different position when I woke up. I had pushed it against the door before I slept. When I woke up, it was back at the table. The pencil was in a different spot too. An entry from 2019 said simply, I heard breathing outside the door all night. It stopped at sunrise. I left immediately. The most recent entry, 6 weeks before mine, said I won't be coming back. Whatever lives near this cabin knows the journal is here. I think it reads it. I think it's learning about us from what we write. I'm not adding anything else. Neither should you. I read that last entry and I looked at the pencil on the table, sharpened, ready. The point was clean, fresh, no graphite dust around the tip. I looked more closely at the wood. The shavings were gone, but the cut was new. The exposed wood where the blade had shaped the point was light, not oxidized, not weathered. Someone had sharpened this pencil recently, not 6 weeks ago when the last entry was written, days ago, maybe less, which meant someone had come into this cabin after the person who wrote, I won't be coming back, had left. Someone had sat in this chair, read that warning, and instead of being deterred, they had sharpened the pencil, prepared the table, centered the journal, made sure everything was ready for the next visitor, the next name, the next entry, the next piece of information to add to a collection that had been growing for 20 years. I thought about who sharpens a pencil in a cabin in the woods that nobody is supposed to know about. I thought about the entries that describe the door opening on its own and the chair moving back to the table and the breathing outside all night. And I thought about the simplest explanation. The one that made every hair on my body stand straight up. The person sharpening the pencil and the thing breathing outside the door were the same. Not a person. Something that had learned to sharpen a pencil by watching 20 years of hikers do it. Something that maintained this cabin the way a spider maintains a web, keeping it clean, keeping it functional, keeping the journal ready. Because the journal was the point. The journal was the trap, not the cabin. The cabin was just the structure that held the trap. The journal was where the data lived. The names, the dates, the fears, the roots, everything it needed to know about the humans who walked through its forest. I closed the journal. I didn't write in it. I didn't add my name or my date or anything about myself. I gave it nothing. I sat in that cabin until the storm passed. About 90 minutes. The whole time I watched the door. It stayed closed. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear footsteps. Nothing happened. But the air in that cabin felt occupied. Not by me, by something else. Something patient. Something that was waiting for me to leave so it could sit in that chair and open the journal and check whether the latest visitor had added their name. I left the cabin as soon as the rain slowed. I hiked the 3 miles to the official shelter. I slept there that night, surrounded by other hikers. Safe. Normal. I never went back to find that cabin. I tried once. 6 months later, I hiked the same section of trail. I looked for the spot where I had ducked off into the spruce. I couldn't find it. The woods looked the same everywhere. 200 feet off the trail, in any direction, is just more forest. I walked back and forth for an hour. Nothing. No cabin, no clearing, no gray-green wood between the trees. It was gone. Or I couldn't find it, or it didn't want to be found by someone who hadn't written in the journal, someone who hadn't given it what it wanted, a name, a date, a fear, a piece of themselves left behind on a page in a leather-bound book on a table in a room in the woods where something sits in the dark and sharpens pencils and reads and reads and reads. Those were 3 true stories from people who walked into the forest and discovered that the forest had been expecting them. If you made it to the end, tell me which one shook you the most. Drop it in the comments. If you've had an experience on a trail that you still can't explain, leave your story below. The most disturbing ones get featured in future videos. Subscribe if you haven't. New stories every week. Share this with anyone who hikes, especially anyone who hikes alone. And the next time you're on a trail and you see a cairn, ask yourself who built it. And the next time you hear your name whispered in the woods, don't answer. And the next time you find a journal in a cabin and a sharpened pencil next to it, don't write your name. Because something might be reading.